Since 1972, local governments in Florida have had some form of comprehensive planning requirements, whether it be through the DRI process or through the local government comprehensive planning process. However, major changes to this process were enacted in 2011 through the Community Planning Act. However, local government comprehensive plans are still required. A local government comprehensive plan really sets out a local government's vision of what it wants to be when it grows up. The comprehensive plan is made up of elements or chapters that determine how that government wants to be in the future. These elements are typically in the form of a future land use element, transportation, capital improvements, conservation, housing, and in the case of coastal communities, a coastal management element. These requirements are found in Chapter 163, Part 2, in 163, 3177, 3178, 3180, and other portions of the statute. The goal of community planning is to protect human, environmental, social, and economic resources through orderly growth, and to maintain the character and stability for the present and future land uses and development. The 2011 Community Planning Act made many changes to the way comprehensive planning in Florida was enacted. Most of the changes were seen as a change from shifting from a state-mandated planning to more control at the local level. Many of the changes were very significant, including the removal of Rule 9J5, as well as an elimination of the twice per year limitation on comprehensive plan amendments. There were also revisions made to the small-scale amendment process in Chapter 163, 3187. No longer was there a limitation on the timing of small-scale amendments or the ownership requirements. There are also changes to the large-scale amendment process, bifurcating the process into a state-coordinated process and an expedited state review process. Major changes were also made to concurrency. Transportation concurrency is no longer required. Also, school concurrency and parks and recreation concurrency is also no longer required. The only required state concurrency systems are water, sewer, and stormwater concurrency. Should a local government maintain transportation concurrency, they do need to allow for developers to pay proportionate share, and they can no longer charge for backlog facilities. The revisions to the amendment process are very notable. As I mentioned earlier, there's no longer a limitation on the twice per year amendment cycle, meaning local governments can process as many amendments as they wish per calendar year. The state coordinated process is similar to the old cycle, where the state would issue an ORC report. This applies to very few amendments, though. It applies within areas of critical state concern, to proposed rural land stewardship areas, to proposed sector plans and amendments within sector plans, to an update based on an evaluation and appraisal review amendment, to a proposed development that qualifies as a development of regional impact, and for an amendment for a plan for a newly created municipality. These are the only amendments that would qualify for the state coordinated process. All other amendments go through the expedited review process. And the expedited review process is detailed in Section 3184, Paren 3. The state coordinated process is detailed in 3184, Paren 4. I'm going to talk a little about the differences in the amendment process. To highlight the differences between the two amendment processes, the state coordinated process, the review agencies have 30 days to send their comments to the State Land Planning Agency. The State Land Planning Agency then has 60 days to issue an objections, recommendations, and comments report, in which they review for consistency with Chapter 163, Part 2, meaning that they are reviewing for internal inconsistencies as well as compliance with Chapter 163, Part 2. After the amendment is adopted, the amendment is then sent back to the State Land Planning Agency, and the State Land Planning Agency has 45 days from the receipt of a complete package to make a compliance determination on the amendment and post a notice of intent regarding whether or not the amendment is in compliance or not in compliance with Chapter 163, Part 2. Under the expedited state review process, each review agency sends their comments to the local government separately. They each have 30 days to review the amendment for impacts to important state resources and facilities within their purview. They send their comments individually to the local government within 30 days of receipt of the amendment, meaning each agency has a separate time clock from their receipt of the amendment. There's also no completeness check from when they get the amendment. The amendments are also reviewed just for their impacts to important state resources and facilities. They are not reviewed for compliance with 163 Part 2 or internal inconsistencies at the state level. And upon adoption, the State Land Planning Agency then reviews the adopted amendment for its impacts to important state resources and facilities based on the comments received from all the state agencies, and has 45 days to determine whether or not to challenge an amendment. State agency comments must be received within 30 days by the local government in order for them to base a challenge to the amendment. They also must state with specificity any impacts to important state resources or facilities, what these impacts would be, and also what mitigation measures could be taken to offset these impacts if a state agency wants the State Land Planning Agency to challenge any proposed amendment. Chapter 163, 3184, Paren 3 identifies the different review agencies and the impacts for which they review. The DEP shall limit its comments to air, water pollution, wetlands, surface waters, and other environmental impacts. Similarly, Department of State limits its comments to historic and archaeological resources. Transportation limits its comments to those jurisdictions that are transportation related, and so on and so forth. Finally, the State Land Planning Agency's comments are limited to those important state resources and facilities outside the jurisdiction of any other state agency. Other commenting agencies include the regional planning councils. Counties can comment on the contents of plan amendments in relationship to the county plan. Municipalities can comment on the effect of the plan amendment to the municipal plan, and military installations can comment on the plan consistent with the impacts on 163-3175. Affected parties have a little bit more leeway when it comes to plan amendments. They comment directly to a local government. No longer do they comment to the State Land Planning Agency. Their comments, however, go to the local government, and if they wish to challenge a plan amendment, they must challenge within 30 days of the local government adoption hearing. The State Land Planning Agency may not intervene with a third-party challenge. An affected party, however, is not limited to important state resources and facilities when they review a plan. They can review for compliance, so they can review for consistency with Chapter 163 as well as internal inconsistencies. However, in challenges filed by an affected party, the comprehensive plan shall be determined to be in compliance if the local government's comprehensive plan amendment is determined to be fairly debatable. So while they do have the compliance determination on their side, they do have a high standard to meet with fairly debatable. With regard to the burden of proof for the State Land Planning Agency, Section 3184, Paren 5 lays out these different burdens of proof. When the State Land Planning Agency challenges a state coordinated plan amendment, the state must have the preponderance of evidence that that plan amendment is not in compliance. And for the expedited state review amendments, the state must have a fairly debatable standard for those, as with affected parties. Also, big changes came in 2011 to the evaluation and appraisal review process. Prior to 2011, local governments every 7 years were required to do an evaluation and appraisal report, meaning they reviewed their plan against major issues facing their community. It was sent to the state for sufficiency review. This process was eliminated in 2011. Now local governments are simply required to determine whether or not they need to update their plan based on changes in statute. Consistent with the schedule set forth in Rule 73C-49, local governments must notify the State Land Planning Agency of their determination whether or not to update their plan. They send a letter to the state and let the state know whether or not they have to update their plan. If the local government tells the state they must update their plan, within 1 year, these amendments must be transmitted to the state, or there is a prohibition on that local government from amending their plan. The state cannot challenge a local government's determination of whether or not amendments are necessary based on its evaluation and appraisal review of its plan, regardless of any legislative changes to Chapter 163, Part 2. Be sure to check back with the Development and Land Use Committee website for additional resources. Thank you.